You are listening to the Exploder Wrestling Podcast, a ZTO TV podcast.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the show. My name's Dan, this is Exploder, and I have another episode just for you. I've taken a couple weeks off. I don't know if it's been exactly 2 weeks or 3 weeks or what have you. Like I said before, I have a newborn in the house, so it's a little busy, and I'm still working a full-time job. This shutdown never affected me. I'm in the healthcare field, so I'm still doing my job. Anyway, in this episode, I'm going to talk to you about something in professional wrestling that's really gone by the wayside, something that used to happen a lot more often and really doesn't happen. It does happen occasionally, and I'll talk about that later in the episode, but it's something that isn't as common now in pro wrestling as it used to be, and that's why I'm talking about the Super Show. Now, I don't talk about when Raw and SmackDown get together, and they have a Raw Super Show like they did in, I think, 2011 or something that was just an excuse for SmackDown guys to be on Raw because Raw's ratings were in the tank. I'm talking about pro wrestling actual Super Shows. And now understand there are rules. I like to put rules on everything I do just to clarify, to laser focus what I'm doing. When I'm talking about Super Shows, what I mean is shows that feature more than one promotion and are basically people that come together and have a show that people don't see coming. Something that is out of the ordinary, not something you see every day. So someone coming from SmackDown onto Raw, which is all the same brand, or NXT invading SmackDown, or 205 Live, or whatever, flavor of ice cream you want under the WWE umbrella. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about real Super Shows. I'm going to start off with the original Super Show. Maybe, I don't know if it'll be the first, but it's probably in this time chronologically. I like to go chronologically. Probably the most famous. I'm talking about Super Clash. As I've covered before, Super Clash was an attempt by the remaining territories and promoters to come together under a common brand called Pro Wrestling USA and compete against the King Kong that was the WWF. There were 4 of these shows, and as you'll see, they weren't entirely yearly. The first Super Clash would do reasonably well, drawing 20,347 people to Comiskey Park in Chicago, Illinois, to see NWA champion Ric Flair defeat Magnum TA, and AWA World Champion Rick Martel go to a double countout with Stan Hansen in 2.5 minutes. Alright, amazing they had more of these. Unfortunately, this would be the best Super Clash as they would ever have, with Super Clash 2 drawing a whopping 2,800 people to the Cow Palace in San Francisco. That's an 87% drop in attendance from one year to 85 to 87. Think about that. Even with terribly diminishing crowds, the most famous Super Clash was Super Clash 3, which would feature AWA World Champion Jerry Lawler defeat World Class Champion Kerry Von Erich to win the title after ref stoppage. Now, this was sold as a unification match, but Super Clash 3 was unsuccessful, drawing 1,672 people. Pro Wrestling USA would soon dissolve. The world class promoter Fritz Von Erich would end up selling the promotion to Continental promoter Jerry Jarrett, and the two promotions will be merged to create the United States Wrestling Alliance, which, like I've said, is probably the last territory, and I covered more in depth on the blog, which on the Facebook page, if you follow me on the Facebook page, I will link to this blog. It's one of my older ones, but it talks about the formation and the eventual demise of the USWA. And really, the creation of USWA starts with the fallout of Super Clash 3. There would be one more Super Clash in 1990, but it was a wide departure from the so-called glory days, if you can call them that. While Super Clashes 1 through 3 feature stars like Ric Flair, the Rock and Roll Express, Kerry Von Erich, Jerry Lawler, Super Clash 4 had guys like The Trooper and Jake Milliman, the stars. On the other end, the WWF and New Japan and All Japan, would you believe it, had a majorly successful show in the Tokyo Dome on April 13th, 1990, drawing 53,742 fans. The WWF and New Japan had been working together since the 70s, but this was a unique time where the two were also working with All Japan, which was New Japan's rival. This is not uncommon for Japan, as promotions are more often to be working with each other, including rivals like New Japan and All Japan, though that would change for a bit. A nice piece of trivia here is where the opening match featured 2 talents that would actually work for the WWF 7 years later, as Doug Furnas and Dan Kroffat teamed with Joe Malenko to defeat Samson Fayuki, Tatsumi Kitahara, and Toshiaki Kawada. Dan Kroffat would later use the name Phil LaFon, and he and Furnas had a brief run in both WWF and WCW and ECW, in 1997. The show would be a feature of talent from all 3 promotions, everyone from Macho Man Randy Savage to Pillman, Genichiro Tenryu, Ted DiBiase, Shinya Hashimoto, and King Haku, who is exactly who you think he is. This would be the last time the WWF, New Japan, and All Japan would ever work together with one another. The WWF would end the relationship with New Japan to work for Tenryu's startup promotion Super World of Sports, which I will get to. All Japan and New Japan would continue their rivalry, not doing another show with each other until the early 2000s. And New Japan, fresh off their decades-long relationship with the WWF, would do what most jilted lovers would do in this situation, immediately rebound with a bunch of sweaty guys in Atlanta. Which brings us to the next set of Super Shows. WCW's relationship with New Japan began in 1991, starting with Starrcade in the Tokyo Dome, which was shot on March 21st, 1991, and later airing as Starrcade in America in April of 1991. Now, not all the matches were shown in America. Some were for the live crowd, and some were for the pay-per-view. It was sort of cut down. The event drew 64,500 people and was headlined by IWGP champion Tatsumi Fujinami defeating NWA champion Ric Flair to win the NWA title, kind of. They basically did it where the Japanese audience would think Fujinami would win the NWA title, but not the WCW title, which at this point, this is 1991, they're still the same thing. Then they told the American audience that Fujinami didn't win the title because he threw Ric Flair over the top rope, which was against NWA rules. They basically did an international dusty finish, which is insane. The two would meet again so Ric Flair could win back the NWA title, but all American promotional materials said it was a title defense for Flair, basically saying Fujinami never really won the belt. It's not in the history books. It's something that happened, but was done for that market, and the North American, the NWA, does not even recognize this title run. So that was sort of weird. You know, wrestling used to be pretty weird. They would do two more of these shows in January of 1992 and January of 1993, with each subsequent show drawing over 50,000 people. Matter of fact, the third show claimed 53,500, but actually drew 63,500. That's right, WCW deflated their attendance numbers. Only WCW would do that. WCW and New Japan would continue working relationship for years, including Starrcade 1995, where they held a best-of-7 interpromotional World Cup of Wrestling series, in which Sting defeated Kensuke Sasaki in the tie-breaking match. Now, this was not necessarily an interpromotional Super Show, as the show was based around the WCW storylines at the time, but they did feature a good number of New Japan talent, and of course, later New Japan talent would be involved in the NWO, Masa Chono, and the Great Muta, and Tenzan, and all that stuff. So that relationship would continue even after this first set of Super Shows had come and gone. Then there's the WWF Super Shows with the Super World of Sport. These were 3 shows held at the Tokyo Dome. The first event happened on March 30th, 1991, which was 7 days after WrestleMania 7 and 9 days following. So this is 9 days after the New Japan WCW Starrcade 91 show at the Tokyo Dome. So this is at the Tokyo Dome 9 days after WCW had one with New Japan. Koji Kitao and Genichiro Tenryu, of course, was the boss of SWS. It was his promotion. Would defeat Demolition at WrestleMania 7. That was sort of a weird match, but, you know. And this was sort of the return. Then they brought a bunch of the WWF would bring over WWF guys to work the SWS shows, and they sort of worked back and forth. Now, like I said, these were 3 shows. The March shows saw a near shoot between Kitao and Earthquake. Kitao would basically shoot on Earthquake, which is a horrible thing to do, because Kitao was a sumo wrestler who became a wrestler. So was John Tenta, the guy behind Earthquake, and Kitao tried to shoot on him, and it didn't go well for him. And then Kitao would get on the microphone, on a live microphone, and declare wrestling was fake, and then quit. He would like I said, he would expose the business, and they would eventually fire him. That actually happened at one of these SWS shows. SWS itself would only last until June 19th, 1992. It held its final card at the Nagasaki International Gym. Interesting fact about the promotion, about the relationship with the WWF was so close, the promotion's tag team titles were held mostly by WWF talent, with King Haku leaving WWF and held the tag team titles with Yoshiaki Yatsu twice before leaving, and the Natural Disasters, those ones would even hold the titles very briefly, and by briefly I mean a day. Haku and Yatsu would be the last SWF Tag Team Champions before the promotion folded and the titles were retired. Moving forward, it's June 1st, 1996. It is the World Wrestling Peace Festival. This was produced by New Japan promoter and star Antonio Inoki, held at the Los Angeles Sports Arena. The show was meant to bring together talent from all over the world, and it did just that, if only for a single show. The show drew, now this seems kind of good, kind of bad, the show drew 5,964 people and featured talent from WCW, AAA, CMLL, the NWA as it was, New Japan, of course, All Japan Women's Pro Wrestling, which used to be its own promotion, Michinoku Pro. The WWF and ECW did not participate, which was sort of understandable on the WWF side because the idea that WWF at that point in 1986 would put any of their talent in a same card with the WCW talent was sort of unheard of. And a matter of fact, I think at this point there had already been a lawsuit. So I think at this point the WWF had already sued WCW over the Kevin Nash Scott Hall thing, Razor Ramon. So I can imagine you wouldn't want to put your guys on a card, a random promotion in LA, random card with talent from a company you're actively suing. Probably doesn't that good. The event was moderately successful as it brought together rival promotions AAA and CMLL out of Mexico, which itself was considered almost impossible because those are two promotions that were really at each other's throats in Mexico at the time. But the 5,964 was well shy of what promoters expected to be 17,000 people. When you're expecting 17,000, you would get you get just shy of 6. You got to be a little disappointed. That's like a third of what you're expecting. This was Inoki's first promoted show in the United States, but it was plagued with poor venue choice and a clear lack of advertising, which probably led to less than 6,000 people showing up. I will say, I know of the show because I saw a write-up in it in PWI. I've talked about wrestling magazines before. I was a big wrestling magazine guy. I read about the Pro Wrestling Peace Festival, and honestly, my memory of this was like the first thing, that was the impetus. That was what got me into, what about the Supershows? What about, and that's where I came up with the idea to do this episode. I came up with it because I was thinking about the World Wrestling Peace Festival because it was so unique that people from all over the world, all these different promotions were coming together for one show. It was a unique experiment. It was only done once. It wasn't nearly as successful as New Japan's previous shows with WCW, but you can't knock Inoki for trying. This show also, along with AAA's When Worlds Collide, which was a AAA show that was produced by WCW in 1994, which I'm not going to put on here as a super show because I looked into it. It's really not a super show in the way that I explained it. Like I said, there are rules, and the reason I have the rules is because you have to go with these parameters, and it wasn't a show of inter-promotional matches. And this was When Worlds Collide was a AAA show that WCW basically produced and put some of their announcers on and showed to an American audience, but it wasn't a interpromotional thing, so that's why it's not included here. But When Worlds Collide in 1994 introduced the American audience to Lucha Libre. We take that show and this show, which featured many of the same talents, and this actually inspired Eric Bischoff to hire both Rey Mysterio Jr. and Chris Jericho from this show, the World Wrestling Peace Festival alone. Then sometimes you'll end up with very unique shows. They're not necessarily done. I mean, they are done in a way for money, but it's not necessarily about the money. The World Wrestling Peace Festival, I'm sure Inoki had some kind of lofty goals, but it was a one-time show, drew 6,000 people, was never done again. Terry Funk's Wrestle Fest in 1997 was a show basically bringing people together for one of, it appeared to be one of Terry Funk's final night in wrestling, and everyone showed up to give him the proper respect, from ECW to FMW to even the WWF sent representatives. The event would feature everyone from Wing Kanamura to Taz to Chris Candido, the Bushwhackers, Shane Douglas, Tommy Dreamer, Terry's older brother Dory Funk, and even his old buddy he regularly tried to set on fire, Mick Foley, wearing his Mankind mask. This event was featured in Beyond the Mat, which made a big deal out of Terry Funk's, 20th for real this time retirement, and made Dennis Stamp a wrestling meme. The main event featured Funk doing the job for then WWF champion Bret Hitman Hart in what would be the Funkers' last match for a couple of months. And it was good to see someone showing respect to a guy like that, but again, in the long range, yeah, he lasted a couple of months, but it was still a unique event where everyone came together and had this show with all these interpromotional matches, all these different guys, to show respect to a legend like Terry Funk. Then there's the odd ones. There's the ones they're good shows, they're unique, but at the same time it's sort of sad circumstances. The Brian Pillman Memorial Show went from 1998 to 2001. Following the death of Brian Pillman, the Heartland Wrestling Alliance, which was owned by Les Thatcher out of Cincinnati, Ohio, decided to run an annual event with the proceeds going to Brian's widow Melanie and their young children. Pillman was a native of Cincinnati, Ohio, and was closely tied to the HWA, even being responsible for younger talent like Brian Beach, off the top of my head, and guys like that getting into the business in the first place. The first Brian Pillman Memorial Show would occur on April 29, 1998, and feature talents such as Nick Dinsmore, Steve Dunn, Shark Boy, Sean Casey, Al Snow, Chris Candido, and even WCW wrestlers Chris Benoit and Chris Jericho. The second memorial would be held on May 19th, 1999, and feature many local independents, as well as the WWF's Road Dogg, Mankind, and D'Lo Brown, as well as WCW's Conan, Rey Mysterio, Chris Benoit, and Dean Malenko. Subsequent years would feature talents from all over wrestling, including Cody Michaels, Vampiro, Hugh Morris, Raven, Just Incredible, Eddie Guerrero, Reckless Youth, Chuck Palumbo, Sean O'Hare, Jamie Noble, Diamond Dallas Page, Nigel McGuinness, Chad Collier, Charlie and Russ Haas, Steve Corino, The Hardy Boys, Edge and Christian, Lita, David Flair, and Steven Regal. It was a match between Steven Regal and Chris Benoit at the 2000 Brian Pillman Memorial that prompted the WWF to give Regal a second chance after his Man's Man washout in 1999. The match is a wrestling clinic and it's featured in the long out of print and will never be back in print Chris Benoit Hard Knocks DVD from 2004. If you have this DVD, or you can find it and buy it, and you can bring yourself to watch a Chris Benoit match again. I know some people have trouble with that. Watch this match. It is amazing. I mean, it's wrestling. It is wrestling the way it should be. And matter of fact, I like to throw these little pieces of trivia. A little piece of trivia. My trainer, the guy who actually got me into I'm not in the business, but the guy who trained me originally, actually was the cameraman for that match and had the master tape. Years later, he contacted WWE and see if they wanted the master tape, and he was willing. He was ready to send it to him. He just wanted to send it to him so they'd have it, and they didn't seem like they were interested for some reason. Like, I don't know. I'm not saying they blew him off. They just weren't interested. So what footage they got, how they got the footage they had for the DVD, I don't know, because I know for a fact who has the master tape, and it's not the WWE. So maybe they had a good copy and didn't think the master was that important. I don't know. But I always thought that was like nice little piece of trivia. Now going on to the independent super shows. These are I would say these are more common, but they're common, but they're not done right. Independent wrestling, as small as it may be and how, independent it is, sometimes egos get in the way. So it's good to see shows occasionally that bring independent wrestlers together and make different promotions together. This was a wrestling supercard called Break the Barrier. Happened on May 15th, 1999. It was a wrestling supercard held at the ECW Arena. There's all these different names for the arena, but everyone knows it as the ECW Arena. The event was organized by the founders of ScoopsWrestling.com, Al Isaacs, Remy Artiaga, I'm sure I got that wrong, and Barbie Bistrowitz, and brought together top independent promotions from 12 different independents around the country, including Combat Zone Wrestling, Extreme Championship Wrestling, Maryland Championship Wrestling, NWA New Jersey, Steel City Wrestling, and many others. It featured talents including Mike Quackenbush, Nick Gage, Justice Payne, The Headbangers, Stevie Richards, The Pitbull, and on and on. It would also be notable for Shane Douglas doing his trademark shoot promo in the ring, where he seemingly quit ECW for real, which was then backed up when he didn't appear at the next night's Hardcore Heaven pay-per-view. And this is real because he was behind on money, he wasn't getting paid, and he would eventually sign with WCW. So at this time, he basically does this show on May 15th, blah, 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 and he quits, and people are like, oh, it's Shane Douglas doing a shoot promo, okay, it's what he does, and then he just didn't show up at the pay-per-view the next night, which he was supposed to work. This was him and Just Incredible, if I remember correctly, and he didn't come in, so that's interesting. All in all, it was a well-received indie show. It was considered one of the best independent shows of the year. It only happened once. And honestly, it's all you ever could do. For what it was successful, but it's a kind of thing where, like I said, egos and logistics and all these things, you can't do that all the time. So doing one, Break the Barrier was another, and this is another one I saw in PWI Magazine. I knew of the Break the Barrier show because of the reporting on it after the fact. But it was just a unique little snippet in history, and before I started researching this, I didn't know about the Shane Douglas part. I knew he left ECW around this time, but I didn't know the connection to the Break the Barrier card, which I think is really unique. Like I said, super shows now, actual real super shows, are not that common anymore. But one of the most unique ones, one of the ones that are still happening, are the ones between Ring of Honor and New Japan, the War of the Worlds, which has been going on since 2014 and appears to be continuing on despite our current situation. These are joint shows between both Ring of Honor and New Japan. They happen in North America. The first event was held on May 17th, 2014 at the famous Hammerstein Ballroom and was headlined by a three-way match for the IWGP Heavyweight Championship between new champion AJ Styles, Kazuchika Okada, and Michael Elgin, with Styles getting the win in his first IWGP title defense. The show was proved to be a success. They would have 2 of these shows during a double shot the next year, May 12th and May 13th, 2015, at the name always changing ECW Arena. They would then have 3 in 2016 and 7 in 2017, which includes an UK offshoot making stops in London, Liverpool, and Edinburgh. Those shows continue to this day, and the inevitable 2020 shows were being canceled due to reasons. Well, that's gonna do it for this time. I hope you enjoyed this topic. I like to talk about wrestling in a very, I've heard it said, like a magazine type way, sort of look at a topic and sort of zooming in on it. You know, I list a lot of things I talk about. I don't do the top 10 lists or things like that. I do that on the blog, but I don't do that on here. It's not really a top 10 thing. It's not the best or the worst. It's mostly just compiling things. I'm talking about how some things repeat in pro wrestling. And super shows, I think, are something you don't find much anymore, like I said, with the exception of the War of the World shows. But right now, wrestling is there's so much going on, and there's so many great promotions. There's so many great wrestlers out there. Find something you love, watch it, enjoy it, and all those things. But I also like going backwards. I also like looking at pro wrestling in the past and looking at some of the things that aren't as common, but were still pretty cool. Anything from Break the Barrier to the joint shows with WCW and New Japan, or the WF and SWS, or the World Wrestling Peace Festival, things like that. It's so unique and so something that's not really happening anymore, but I still think it's very interesting. So I hope you enjoyed the topic. Give me some feedback if you think I should go deeper on stuff like this, or if you don't want me to talk about the current product. God, whatever you like, whatever you want to hear, let me know. Check us out on Instagram. Check us out on Facebook if you're not already. I have a Twitter, but it's a personal thing. There's really not a lot of wrestling related Twitter stuff I do, so that's a whole different thing. But yeah, like I said, I've got some other projects coming out. Right now we're editing one that will come out online. It'll be on Facebook, and it's going to be streaming everywhere. It's going to be cool. It's comedy related, but not wrestling related, but I think you'll still enjoy it. And as soon as we're able to do live shows again, the Gromy Show will come back. Check out Something About Sports. Check out Time for Tacos. Check out Murder Fluent, Last Round of Horror Show, all these great podcasts on the ZTO network. Check them all out. Whatever you like, there's something for everybody. But that's all for me this time. So until next time, my name's Dan. This is Exploder. Have a good one.